My name is Max, and for the last few weeks, strange things have been happening in my home. It started small. Objects moved when I wasn't looking, lights flickering, cold spots in the hallway. First, I tried to ignore it. It's an old house, I told myself. Old houses creak, and wiring isn't always reliable. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise from the living room, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against the floor. I froze, listening closely. There it was again, only louder this time. I grabbed my phone and slowly made my way down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the living room, it was empty, but the air felt wrong, thick and heavy. I flicked on the lights, but the room was just as I'd left it. Everything seemed normal, until I turned around. She was standing there, a woman, pale and dressed in an old, tattered white gown, stood in the doorway, her eyes locked on me. She didn't move, just stared, her expression blank and cold. My blood turned to ice. Who are you? I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. She said nothing. Instead, she took a slow step forward, her bare feet gliding silently across the floor. My heart raced as I backed away, but she didn't stop. Her eyes, dark and hollow, never left mine. Without a word, she disappeared, vanishing into thin air, leaving me alone in the silent room. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it had been a nightmare. Maybe I was overworked, stressed, seeing things. But then it happened again, and again. Every night, without fail, she appeared in my house. She would stand in the doorway, staring at me with those dead eyes. Sometimes she moved closer, her presence cold and suffocating. Other times, she would simply watch, disappearing as quickly as she had come. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My house no longer felt like my own. It wasn't long before I learned more about her. I started seeing things, flashes of memories that weren't mine. She showed me scenes from her life, painful images of betrayal and heartbreak. I saw a man, her lover, maybe her husband, turning his back on her, leaving her alone. I saw her spiraling into rage, into hatred, and I saw how she died, alone, abandoned, her heart consumed by bitterness. It didn't take long for me to understand. This wasn't just a random haunting. She wasn't merely a ghost. She was something darker, something vengeful. I was the target of her rage, not because of anything I had done, but because of what I represented. I was a man, and she hated all men. She hated me. Her appearances became more frequent, more violent. Objects would fly across the room, shattering against the walls. The temperature would drop so low that my breath turned to mist, even in the middle of summer. And always, she would appear, closer and closer each time. One night, I woke up to find her standing right beside my bed, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were filled with fury, her hands outstretched, as if ready to choke the life out of me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to stop her. But how do you stop something that's already dead? I researched everything I could about hauntings and vengeful spirits, trying to find a way to end this nightmare. The more I learned, the more hopeless it seemed. She wasn't going to stop until I was dead, just like the others she had tormented over the years. Then, one night, she made her final move. I was sitting in my living room, too exhausted to care anymore. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I felt her before I saw her. The air grew cold, and that familiar feeling of dread washed over me. This time, she didn't wait in the doorway. She appeared right in front of me, her face twisted in anger. Without a word, she lunged at me, her hands wrapping around my throat. Her grip was icy, and I struggled to breathe as she tightened her hold. In that moment, something snapped inside me. I wasn't going to die like this. With every ounce of strength I had left, I grabbed a nearby lamp and swung it at her. To my surprise, it passed through her like smoke, but the shock of the blow seemed to disorient her. Her grip loosened just enough for me to pull away. I ran to the kitchen, fumbling for the bag of salt I had read about in my desperate research. Spirits, they said, hated salt. It was worth a shot. As she materialized again, I flung the salt in her direction. She let out a piercing scream, a sound that shook me to my core. Her form flickered, distorting like a static-filled image on a broken TV. And then, with one final scream, she vanished. The silence that followed was deafening. The air felt lighter, warmer. For the first time in weeks, the house felt empty. It's been months since that night, and she hasn't returned. I don't know if I truly got rid of her or if she's just waiting, biding her time. Some nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I hear her whispering my name, but she never appears. I moved out of that house not long after, unable to bear the memories it held. But even in my new place, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, somewhere, filled with hatred, waiting for her next victim. I survived her wrath, but I know I'll never truly be free of her. Some things, some curses, stay with you forever. After I moved out, I did everything I could to forget what happened in that house. I threw myself into work, took up new hobbies, and spent more time with friends. Anything to keep my mind occupied, to drown out the lingering memories of her, of the woman. But no matter how hard I tried, the silence would creep in during the quiet moments. When the sun set and the world around me calmed, the memories would come flooding back. I couldn't stop thinking about her cold, dead eyes, her fingers tightening around my throat, the sound of her whispering my name in the dark. At first, I thought I just needed time. Time to process, to let the fear fade. But weeks turned into months, and still, she haunted my thoughts. It was like a shadow that followed me, never too close, but always there. I tried therapy, thinking maybe a professional could help me unpack the trauma. The therapist listened patiently as I explained my haunting, careful to avoid calling it a ghost story. I framed it as a bad experience, a toxic environment that had gotten under my skin. I didn't tell her about the nights I woke up sweating, convinced I could hear the faint rustling of fabric in the hallway, or the moments when I felt a sudden chill despite the warmth of the room. "You've been through something unsettling," the therapist said. "It's not unusual for our minds to hold onto those memories longer than we'd like. You just need to give yourself space to heal." Her words made sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just in my mind, that she was still out there. The nightmares started again a few weeks later. At first, they were vague, shadows moving in the distance, muffled sounds I couldn't quite place. But they grew more vivid with each passing night. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I started seeing her. It began with flashes. Just for a split second, I'd catch a glimpse of her in the corner of my eye, in the reflection of a window, a flicker of white behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing there. I told myself it was stress, or my mind playing tricks on me. But the more I ignored it, the worse it got. One night, I woke up to the sound of a voice, a familiar, cold whisper. "Max!" I shot up in bed, my skin crawling. The room was dark, but I could feel her there. I fumbled for the light, my fingers trembling as I clicked it on. The room was empty, but the cold lingered. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of her presence. It was happening again. I tried to push through it, telling myself it was just fear, nothing more. But each time I felt her presence, it drained me a little more. I stopped sleeping, afraid I'd wake up to find her standing over me again. I began to lose focus at work, zoning out, my mind replaying those horrific nights. My friends started to notice too. I avoided their calls, skipped out on plans, isolated myself. "Max, what's going on with you?" my friend Dan asked one evening when he stopped by unannounced. I hadn't told anyone what was happening. How could I? They wouldn't believe me. Even I didn't want to believe it. "I'm fine, just tired," I said, barely able to meet his eyes. "Tired?" He gave me a once-over, his brow furrowing. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks. Maybe you should take a break. Get out of town for a bit." I nodded, but I knew it wouldn't help. I couldn't run from this. Wherever I went, she would follow. It was a few days later when things escalated again. I had come home late from work, exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open. I must have dozed off, but I woke up to the familiar icy chill. My apartment was pitch black, except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to listen. There, in the silence, was the soft sound of something moving. I felt it before I saw her. The temperature dropped rapidly, the air thick with dread. My breath caught in my throat, and that's when I saw her, the woman, standing at the end of the hallway, her figure barely visible in the dim light. She hadn't changed. Her pale skin, her lifeless eyes, the torn white gown. It was all the same. But this time she didn't just stand and stare. She moved toward me, slowly, deliberately. Each step echoed in my ears, her presence overwhelming the room. Couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. She was closer now, so close I could almost feel her icy breath. "Max?" she whispered, her voice like nails on glass. "You can't escape me." My body trembled, but I forced myself to stand. I had no plan, no idea how to stop her. All I knew was that I couldn't let her take me. I backed away as she approached, my mind racing. What had I learned? What had worked last time? The salt. I needed salt. I stumbled into the kitchen, my hands shaking as I grabbed the container from the counter. As soon as I turned around, she was there. Closer than before, her hand reaching out. "Stop!" I yelled, throwing the salt at her. Her reaction was instant. She screamed, her body flickering like a bad signal on an old TV. Her form distorted, twisting in agony as she let out a blood-curdling wail. The sound made my ears ring, and I dropped the container, stumbling backward as she disappeared once again. The apartment fell silent. The cold lifted. For a moment, I stood there, panting, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. Was she gone? I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed a bag, stuffed it with whatever I could, and ran out of the apartment, leaving behind everything I owned. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to be far away from her, from that place, from the nightmare that was destroying me. But as I sped down the dark highway, the thought gnawed at me, a whisper at the back of my mind. She'll be back. No matter where I went, I couldn't outrun her forever. I was wrong. After that night, I drove for hours, not caring where I ended up. I rented a cheap motel room and stayed there for days, expecting her to find me. But she didn't. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had a night without waking to whispers or the icy touch of her presence. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had beaten her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. I moved again, this time to another city, far from everything I knew. I got a new job, made new friends, and rebuilt my life. On the surface, everything seemed normal. But I couldn't escape the fear that had burrowed deep into my mind. Years passed. Years where she didn't come back. But the waiting never stopped. Every night I expected her to return. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the windows sent a chill down my spine. I kept salt by the door, by the windows, under my bed, just in case. My life became a series of rituals designed to keep her away, even though she never showed any sign of returning. But I couldn't let my guard down. What if she was just waiting? What if the next time she didn't give me a chance to fight back? The paranoia consumed me. I stopped going out at night. I isolated myself, afraid that if I got too comfortable, she'd take advantage of it. Every night, as I lay in bed, I listened for her. The silence, once a comfort, became unbearable. I would stare at the dark corners of the room, convinced I could see her shadow waiting there, watching me. I never knew peace. Years slipped by like this. People moved on, built families, lived their lives. But I remained stuck in that moment, stuck in the fear of her return. It didn't matter that she hadn't come back. The damage had already been done. She didn't need to haunt me physically anymore because she was always in my mind. I tried to live normally. I tried to convince myself that she was truly gone. But no matter where I went or what I did, the fear lingered. Every new house I moved to, every new face I met, it was always there. I never felt safe. I couldn't trust that it was over. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was my existence. I became a shell of who I once was. The man who had once laughed, who had plans and dreams, was gone. In his place was someone constantly looking over his shoulder, unable to find joy in anything. I missed weddings, skipped holidays, pushed away relationships, always making excuses. People thought I was odd or distant, but no one knew the truth. No one knew that every time I closed my eyes, I half expected to open them and see her standing there, her dead eyes locked onto mine. I couldn't let go of the fear, no matter how much time passed. Even as I grew older, more tired, I couldn't stop waiting for her. Decades later, I'm still waiting. She never came back. Not once. But I've spent my entire life trapped in the fear that she might. I never married. I never had a family. I kept moving, kept running, always a step ahead of the ghost that never appeared again. It didn't matter, though. I had built my own prison, and I locked myself inside, with her memory as my only companion. Now, as I sit in this quiet, empty house, I realize she never needed to kill me. My life was stolen the moment I first saw her in my home, the moment her cold whisper crawled into my soul. She may have vanished years ago, but the fear she left behind has lived with me every day since. And that was the real horror. Not the ghost, not the haunting, but the fear of her return. A fear that never goes away. There's a strange irony in living a life haunted by something that never comes back. As time wore on, the ghost herself became less important. The idea of her, the possibility of her return, was what weighed on me most. I became a prisoner of silence, trapped in my own mind, listening for footsteps that never came, waiting for whispers that no longer filled the air. The nights were the worst. Alone in the dark, I would lie still, straining to hear something. A creak of the floorboards, the rustle of her dress, anything. The house always remained quiet, but the silence was oppressive. Every passing minute felt like an eternity, as if she could step through the walls at any moment and reclaim me. I've often wondered if I'd prefer she come back, just to end the waiting. At least then I'd know. At least then, this long, drawn-out fear would have a conclusion. But there's nothing. No final confrontation. No closure. Just endless anticipation, gnawing away at what little is left of me. People moved on with their lives, but I couldn't. My old friends stopped asking about me. At first, they invited me to gatherings, but when I consistently declined, the invitations stopped. I wasn't angry with them. It's not their fault I've become so disconnected from the world, but the isolation changed me. I was no longer the man they knew. The fear had hollowed me out, turned me into a man who barely recognized himself. The face in the mirror grew older, wearier, but the haunted look in my eyes never left. I wasn't just living with fear. I had become it. Some nights I'd drive by the house, the one where it all began. I never had the courage to go inside again, but I would park nearby, watching it from a distance. The house sat there, abandoned, as if frozen in time. No one had lived there since I left. I heard rumors that the place was considered cursed, though no one seemed to know why. I did. I was the curse in a way. The house might have been empty, but its ghost still lived in me. I've spent years asking myself the same question. Was it worth it? Was it worth living my life in fear of something that may never have existed outside my own mind? Rationally, I knew there were ways to move past this. Therapy could have helped more if I had truly let it. Or perhaps if I'd reached out to someone, anyone, and told them the full truth, I could have found some peace. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted peace. My fear had become my identity, the only constant in my life. Without it, who would I be? I clung to the idea of her, of the woman, because as horrifying as the thought of her return was, it was still better than the alternative, living without purpose. At some point, I realized that's what I feared most. Not the ghost, but the thought of living a normal life again. A life without her shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. It's twisted, I know. But after all these years, she's the only thing that's made sense to me. The only thing that's felt real. Now, as I grow old and the days blur into one another, I realize something else. I'm tired of waiting. Tired of the tension, the sleepless nights, the constant anticipation of an event that never comes. Maybe she's still out there biding her time. Or maybe she never was. Maybe the woman I saw that night wasn't a spirit at all, but a projection of my own fears, my own guilt. I've spent so long expecting her to return. I've forgotten how to live without that expectation. But I'm too old now to run from it any longer. If she comes back, so be it. If she doesn't, I'll face the truth that I've spent my entire life waiting for something that never was. And if that's the case, then the real horror wasn't the ghost. It was me, the man who let fear consume him until nothing remained. There's a strange comfort in the realization that the end is near, not from her, but from life itself. I'm not afraid of death. After all these years, I've made peace with it. But I still wonder, on the last night of my life, when the lights go out and I close my eyes one final time, will I hear her voice again? Will she finally come for me, as I always feared she would? I think about it often, that final moment, and a part of me almost welcomes it. Because in the end, perhaps it was never about escaping her. Perhaps the only way to truly end the haunting is to face her once and for all, to let her take what she's been waiting for all these years. Maybe, just maybe, in that final whisper I'll finally understand. And when she comes, I'll be ready.